Meena here, extending a very warm welcome to you. In a series of videos, I am explaining how to do vermicomposting at home in urban context. I've already shared some videos to explain the worm bin requirements, to prepare the bedding and to introduce the worms. I've also shared a video on a set of guidelines on feeding the worms with greens. In this video, which is the fifth in the series, I continue to talk about the worm feed guidelines, which are very, very important. How much greens should we feed our worms on a weekly basis? There is a guideline that is followed very popularly in America, and let me share that. Worms eat typically half or full 100% of their weight on a daily basis. Of course, this depends upon the species. Some species even eat 1.5 times their weight on a daily basis. So, and 1 pound of worms is equal to 0.45 kgs in metric terms, and that is equal to 1000 worms. And here we are talking about the red wigglers. So we take the per day consumption as half their weight here because they will be eating the browns also. So the per day consumption works out to half a pound or 230 grams. And hence per week consumption works out to 3.5 pounds or 1.6 kg. And this is for 1000 worms, even assuming this is a rough ballpark figure for the population, because some worms may die, new worms are born, and so on. So we are talking about a rough figure of 1000 worms existing in the bin. So we require 1.6 kg of greens. And if we have only 100 worms in a small tub like how we started with, we require only 150 to 160 grams of greens per week. In the initial stages of starting a new batch, we strongly recommend feeding the worms with smaller portions of greens. As far as browns are concerned, there is nothing like overfeeding, but definitely it is there with respect to greens. Why do we feed too much of food? Either we want to get rid of our kitchen waste, or we love to pamper the worms with what they like and we keep giving more and more. Whatever be the reason, it's going to be counterproductive because it's going to result in a lot of issues. An excess of greens can cause acidity in the bin. And if there is too much of food left over in a bin that has not yet been broken down, that food will begin to rot. And the bin will no longer have an earthy smell, it will start stinking. And if there is too much of food, it can attract unwanted pests also to the bin. And some moisture is okay for a compost bin, but a lot of fruits, a lot of watery vegetables can increase the moisture level inside the bin. And that can be harmful to the worms too. The number one mistake that is done by people, especially when they are new to vermicomposting as newbies, is overfeeding with respect to greens. So please avoid, when in doubt, give less. Let me quickly talk about a condition called protein poisoning, which is also called sauerkraut or string of pearls. This is a gruesome affliction resulting in death of worms very fast. And for us too, it can be a very disturbing, sickening and shocking experience. I've already spoken about heating of the bin when we put a lot of greens, and especially when they are relatively fresh and undecomposed. Heat is generated because of aerobic decomposition. Suppose we have a lot of fresh green matter and relatively less bedding, decomposition does not happen. If the food is not eaten by the worms and if there is inadequate oxygen supply, the food begins to decay not through decomposition, aerobic decomposition, but through fermentation. So the worm's food actually becomes sour. That's how it gets the name sauerkraut. And the surrounding air becomes very toxic. Unfortunately, worms are unaware of this and they suck up whatever food they can. So the slurped up food actually gets decomposed inside their body. And that forms gas which gets trapped in their intestines. The gases expand and create air-filled pockets. Eventually they burst or otherwise harm them. So when a worm is afflicted by protein poisoning, typically it will have bloated segments alternating with squeezed or narrowed sections in between. The resulting pattern in the body is characteristic of a string of beads or string of pearls. Nice name, but definitely a very gory one for the worms because it's a fatal condition. Thankfully, I have never experienced protein poisoning in the last 5 years, and I do hope that you never experience too. I'm planning a video on troubleshooting, and I will talk about how to manage protein poisoning if it occurs in your bin. But today I'm going to talk about the preventive measures that we need to take. Feed the worms only in small quantity. Underfeeding is better than overfeeding. Ensure adequate bedding. Every time you open the bin, you check whether the bedding is above 30% volume. If it falls below 30%, it's time to add a top-up bedding. Next, feed only what worms want. Understand what they don't like, what causes stress, what causes acidity, etc. Do not feed what your kitchen generates. Next, let's not get overzealous and overfeed the worms. Let worms dictate the feeding schedule. The cardinal rule is very, very simple. If they finish 90% of the previous feed, you give them a new feed again. Otherwise, strictly no. Last but not the least, keep all the fresh green matter for yourself, for your consumption. But as far as worms are concerned, keep them for some time out and let them decompose. Let some bacteria and fungi form on them and then do the feeding. If you take these measures, definitely protein poisoning is something that you will never witness. With respect to timing of eating, we all know the good guideline. Eat only when the previous food that has been taken is digested. The same principle holds good for the worms also. You need to check the spot where you placed the previous feed. If it is 90% gone, then and only then you should do the next feed. If it is not gone, then do not feed the greens at all, period. This is a very crucial point because most worm batches fail because of overlooking this particular point. And how frequently do you check whether the previous feed is gone or not? Well, being summer, I sprinkle water on the cloth piece placed on the surface almost on a daily basis now. But checking whether the feed has vanished or not, you may examine and do this just once or twice a week. Never ever throw or spread the feed on the surface. This is quite unacceptable to the worms. It will attract a lot of fruit flies in the first place. There are other issues too. If the feed is not yet ready for their consumption, say microbes have not yet formed, or if the feed is not to their liking, perhaps because it's a wrong kind of food, the worms really have no place to stay away at all. They will either go into the bin or they will try to escape out. If the entire top surface gets heated up because of the greens not getting eaten up and getting rotten, the worms really can't stand it at all. I get a little emotional also here. This is not a dustbin. This is a sacred bin in which worms are performing their activities for us. So I would suggest strongly not to do this at all and instead do a very simple technique called pocket feeding. Pocket feeding is a very, very easy technique to understand. Consider the four corners of your bin as four pockets. Every time you feed, you dig a small hole or pocket in one corner into the bedding and deposit the food within the pocket. Then cover the pocket with a bit of bedding. So each time you're feeding the worms, you have to dig the pocket into a new area. No new bedding is added here, only the greens. So in this way, food in varying states of decay will be eventually spreading throughout the system. And the worms then work on all layers of material. The greatest advantage of pocket feeding is the simplicity, and most importantly, worms have choice. They still have a lot of space on the surface to stay away from the food if they wish to. And the food is ready, they will definitely move towards it. Feeding is a very simple process and you should not be taking time at all. With the feed ready, open the bin, take a quick look at the spot where you fed previously. If the previous feed still exists, just cover the bin and do not do anything. If the previous feed is gone 90%, then choose a new spot, bury the feed 2 inches down, cover it with the bedding. mark the spot with some kind of a marker like a stick and close the bin immediately. This entire process should not take you more than 30 seconds. Let me now show you how I fed the worm bin in the second and third week after starting the batch. In the next video, I will demonstrate how we apply the guidelines and feed the worms with the greens in our new batch. Thank you for watching my video. Have a great day.